Okay. Licorice Alive. That's what that was. My little Licorice Alive attempt at Charlie Parker's Moose the Mooche. That was another cut off of LA's own Dial Records, and yes, composed and performed by the relentless and brilliant Charlie Parker, who, if they ever put, had a Mount Rushmore for jazz, Charlie would surely be on it. Who's next to him would be, well, that would be up for debate, but let's see, who else? Satchmo, Louis Armstrong would be there, Miles, I think, Duke Ellington, and but that's a debate for another time. We'd probably have to expand that mountain more faces, maybe a 10-tet instead of 4. And actually, I've already gotten some complaints that I talk too much about jazz. So suffice to say, Charlie Parker would be on Mount Rushmore. And the tune you heard, like I said, was called Moose the Mooche. And I did my best to get through it. It's complicated in its syncopation and demanding in its articulation. And Moose the Mooche adheres to a very common chord structure known as rhythm changes, and that's because it's named after the tune I Got Rhythm that also has that same chord structure. And so for you jazz players that are listening, you know this, but for the multitudes that don't play, a little tidbit of musical information. So the result of that, because you have the very similar chord structures, you can play many different melodies over the same chord. So the second time through the rhythm change structure, after I played Moose the Mooche, I played a more familiar piece to those media-addled listeners out there, you cartoon fans. That was the theme, yes, to the Flintstones, which does lay quite comfortably over the rhythm changes chord structures. Yes, the Flintstones. Maybe for my money, the greatest cartoon series of all time. Sort of, how would I describe it? I guess sort of an animated riff on Jackie Gleason's The Honeymooners. I love the basic conceit of the cartoon, that even those Stone Age folks, by that I mean, the cavemen and women, they all lived in the stable, all-white suburban communities, and cave people of the Flintstone ilk were white and affluent, and they probably, yes, voted Republican, and remarkably, they were basically living the American dream tens of thousands of years before anyone knew America even existed. The Flint folk lived side by side with dinosaurs, which is actually probably a mismatch with geological and biological time. But there they were, right next to the dinosaurs. And in the Flintstone era, these were not the same dinosaurs that were roaming around Jurassic Park. The Flintstone dinosaurs were friendly, easily domesticated. As a matter of fact, a brontosaurus was very useful for hauling big stuff. If you were moving, you could hire a brontosaurus, and he would take you all your furniture and stuff to the next location. And additionally, a pterodactyl. A pterodactyl was very useful for playing records. See, their beaks made for an excellent stylus, which produced very high-fidelity sound on the Flintstone records. So if you were in the Flint family, living back in that day, life was basically perfect. The only thing aggravating Fred was his wife, Wilma, because she shopped too much and was regrettably, she was pixelated. And if you don't know what pixelated means, my recommendation would be to watch Frank Capra's Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, and that movie offers by far the best definition available for that term. Okay, where was I? Oh, my God, all these blind alleys. Back to Moose the Mooche. And I want to extend a specific apology to my friend Robert Levin, who listens to this stuff and has mentioned that I speak too much about music, but I'm going to continue on this riff a little bit longer. Here's an interesting tidbit. Moose the Mooche was an actual real person. That's right. He had a small newsstand on Central Avenue where he also he shined shoes, and that was back in the day before Nikes and flip-flops, when footwear actually needed to be shined. And Moose's newsstand was right there on Central Avenue, somewhere very close to the old Dunbar Hotel, which the building still exists on Central Avenue, though no more as a hotel. It's, I think, an old age home if it's still occupied. There used to be a little museum in it, and at least the last time I Ubered by, it was still there. So the Dunbar Hotel was ground zero for all kinds of activity on the avenue. As a matter of fact, it was owned by African Americans since the 20s. Jack Johnson, and this is not Jack Johnson, the Hawaiian singer-songwriter surfer, but Jack Johnson, the ex-heavyweight champion of the world. That Jack Johnson once owned a bar inside the Dunbar Hotel. And next door to the Dunbar was the famous Club Alabama, and everything was happening in and around the Dunbar on the avenue. Anyways, Moose the Mooche was a very familiar face on the main stem back in the late 40s and early 50s. And at that time, it's hard to imagine today, but Central Avenue was LA's real street of dreams. And my thinking is if you don't know about Central Avenue, you don't know about LA. And at that time, it was really the center of African-American cultural, political, and entrepreneurial life. The whole avenue, which runs on a north-south axis from downtown all the way, I think, through Compton, it was jammed with nightclubs and after-hour clubs and after-hour clubs, and anybody and everybody hung out there. White people, black people, movie stars, hustlers, the hip and the curious. They were all kicking it on the avenue. And if you were a jazz musician like Dexter Gordon or Art Farmer or Charles Mingus or Art Pepper or Buddy Collette, and you wanted to play the new stuff that Charlie Parker was digging on, Central Avenue was pretty much the only place on earth outside of the Big Apple that you would want to be. So back to Moose the Mooche. He was known to the cops who roamed the area quite aggressively, I might add, Chief Parker's little foot soldiers or stormtroopers. Moose the Mooche was known to the cops and the prison authorities as Emery Bird. And in addition to shining shoes and selling newspapers, Emery Bird, i.e. Moose the Mooche, had an even more prestigious position in the community, especially if you were a jazz musician, and most especially if you had the habit that Charlie Parker had. Because Moose the Mooche was a dealer of heroin. And in a city renowned for lousy heroin, Emery Bird had the best, and he kept Charlie well supplied and Charlie's psychic boat afloat while he was doing the la-la hang. As a matter of fact, Moose was so critical to Charlie Parker's health that Charlie inked an agreement with Moose and assigned over half of his musical royalties that he earned from Dial Records over to Moose. All of which was, I guess, cool until Charlie was found running around naked in the lobby of a hotel up in Little Tokyo. And he ended up, well, where did he end up? He ended up relaxing at Camarillo State Hospital. And Charlie, he did write a tune about his stay there called, yep, you guessed it, Relaxing at Camarillo. Now, the state hospital isn't there anymore. They closed it some decades ago, and you can't relax there anymore because nowadays those very same buildings are occupied by Cal State University at Channel Islands. But I do hear that it has more crazies there now than it ever did back when Charlie was kicking it. Well, actually, Charlie never kicked it. It eventually killed him, but that's another story. So, that's the backstory on the little tune I spieled for you, Moose the Mooche. And if you want to know more, let me know, and I'll send you my screenplay, Central Avenue. It's all there. Charlie and Moose and Dexter and some other cool characters of my own invention thrown in. So, here we are, folks. A little longer than usual intro. Welcome to episode 20 of Rebel Without Applause. Yeah, 20 episodes. Hard to believe I'm now strapped into the podcast treadmill and I can't get off. Another week, another episode, most of which are coming to you, yes, from the comfy confines of my movie studio apartment here in the Wood of the Holly. And if you didn't hear this before, I see myself as sort of an abstract and brief chronicler of the cockeyed caravan called life. Now, a few notes on the above reference there. Cockeyed caravan is the last line of one of my favorite movies of all time, that being Preston Sturges' Sullivan's Travels, and abstract and brief chronicler is an expression from my fave play of all time, that being Hamlet. And it's offered up in Act 2, Scene 2, when these roving theatricals, these actors, they arrive in the castle at Elsinore to entertain the court. And then Hamlet, aware of their arrival and big fan, he was a very big fan of the theater, a devoted observer of all things theatrical. He warns Polonius, who was one of the senior courtiers, who he will later kill for snooping around in his mother's bedroom. Anyway, Hamlet warns Polonius, who also, another aside, is Ophelia's dad, and that's the same Ophelia who later drowns herself in Act 4. Anyway, to repeat, Hamlet warns Polonius to treat these visiting actors well because, as he calls it, they are the abstract and brief chronicles of the time. And then he admonishes further and says that it were better to have a bad epitaph than their ill report whilst you live. And by that, Hamlet means that you were better to have an insulting little couplet on your tombstone than have the abstract and brief chroniclers, those actors, these satirists and social commentators, rip on you while you are alive. Sort of what the enemy of the people, the press and those folks at CNN or those folks from Saturday Night Live and myself are doing right now to the billionaire brat boy. But what can I say? My feeling is, if you want to save free speech, speak freely. So what the hell? I am doing the best I can. And one of the advantages of a podcast over, say, screenplays, which I spent the best years of my life writing and trying to sell, is that once you're done with a screenplay, it sits on your desk and it torments you. It screams at you, get me made, sell me. Otherwise, your life is meaningless. You are a loser. But alas, podcasting is an altogether different animal. I'm not relying on the gatekeepers. No need to capture the attention of agents or development of executives or their miserable assistants and those Adderall-addicted interns. No, I am free of that. For a podcast, I commit my thoughts to the page. Then I turn on my microphone and it's showtime. Once it's uploaded, it's over. No rewrites. I don't have to make the characters more likable. No need to adjust the second act or the third act or manipulate. It's done. And what's more, I'm not addled by delusions of grandeur. No rehearsing of Oscar speeches that I'll never give. No dreams of that pad in Malibu. Nope. I just upload the audio file. And once it's floating up there in the digital cloud, I'm available to be ignored anywhere and everywhere on Earth. So, there we go. My little podcast rant. Okay, here's a metaphysical question, and I've been racking my brain to solve it. Here it is. If you're underwater, let's say at a depth of around 30 feet, and you're in a kelp forest, and you swim up around 100 or so lobsters crammed in the shadow of a head-high boulder, and nobody else sees those 100 lobsters crammed under the shadow of a head-high boulder but you, did you really see 100 lobsters? That's the question I'm grappling with today, because you see, last Sunday was one of those rare days when conditions combined to create spectacular diving conditions on our coastline. So what did I do? I could not miss that opportunity. I prepped my kayak, got my scuba gear out of my closet, loaded them into my car, and zipped out to Malibu. And there I slid my yak out onto the sand, loaded it up again with all that scuba gear, weights, tanks, regulators, and I paddled out across a glassy seascape. At about a half a mile out, and I'm not at liberty to give away the exact spot because it's out of deference to the creatures that were there, I dropped my little 3-pound anchor. Then I straddled my kayak, slipped into my scuba gear, drew my first breath of compressed air, and slid quietly beneath the surface, all by my lonesome. Not a human soul anywhere near me. The water was insanely clear. The kelp was thick and undulating just ever so slightly in the minuscule surge that was drifting through the grotto. And bubbles gurgling from my regulator, I descended into a gorgeous underwater grotto. Fish were everywhere. Huge sheep's head, tons of calico bass, and to my happy surprise, lobsters. Big ones staring at me from almost every rock. And with about 1,000 or so pounds of air left in my tank, I'd been going this way and that and kind of concentric circles around this incredible little area that I dove upon. I came upon, like I said earlier, a head-high boulder in an especially dense section of kelp forest. Under the boulder were 100 lobsters. And I can tell you this, in all honesty, in all my years of diving Malibu, and I've been doing this for decades, I've never seen anything like it. Oh, my God. They were stacked, these lobsters, one atop the other, their antenna wiggling this way and that. I mean, they were like, it looked like, it looked like the sold-out bleachers at Dodger Stadium. I mean, just all these antennae everywhere, these lobsters stacked 10 abreast, 10 on top of each other, and my bloodlust was rising. I made a mad dash into this lobster scrum, and they darted away, and it was all the dirt from the bottom of the ocean clouded my visibility, but out of the fracas, I did manage to grab 3 nice-sized legal lobbies, and my annual lobster din-din was secured, which I might add was delish. Okay, back to the real world. Topside, the midterms, well, they're finally over. The demos get the house back, and finally they have their hands back on all those gavels and subpoenas, which I am sure they will be banging and issuing with relish and joy. Now, I personally, especially like I said after the last election, I don't consider myself much of an electoral analyst. I'm more of a, history guy. But my precinct in the Wood of the Holly, where I voted yesterday, was packed. But beyond that, I really have no idea, why and how it all came about. I have no idea if college-educated women over 45 from the Kentucky suburbs swung red or blue. Rachel and her gang at MSNBC do that way better than I can. Though I do have to say that Rachel and her gang fucked up big time in 2016. But I think last night they got it generally right. And I guess the looming question is, will the electoral spanking in the House do anything to cool off the PVP? The PVP, as you may or may not know, is Putin's vice president. And the answer to that question is probably not. So for the moment, just tune the brat boy out if you can, if it is possible. My God, the dude has an incredible talent for invading every corner of our brain space. Maybe if all the like-minded, all of us lovable libs got in a giant circle and held hands, closed our eyes, and sang some kind of Gregorian version of Kumbaya, he'd just fade away. Maybe if someone pours water on him, he'll dissolve like the Wicked Witch. Maybe if we meditate hard enough, our collective psychic energy would make the PvP just disappear. Wouldn't that be nice? And last night, I had the craziest dream. I looked up into the sky in my dream, and I saw the most spectacular sight. Clutching their leaf blowers like broomsticks were thousands upon thousands of brown people flying towards our border with those little gas motors strapped to their backs. They were sputtering northwards in formation like geese on the flyway. So many of them, they nearly blocked out the sun. And then I woke up, and then I remembered the news. And it turns out that a ragtag caravan of tired and poor are trekking northward from deep in the heart of Housekeeperland. And for those that failed Republican geography, Housekeeperland is the huge landmass that extends southward from just below the American city of San Diego all the way to the very tip of Patagonia. And according to the Fair and Balanced folks at Fox News, the deserts and jungles, the mountains and valleys of Housekeeperland won't deter these poor trekking masses. Like the Israelites fleeing Egypt, nothing will stop these tired and poor brown people till they arrive in the land of antibiotic-infused milk in genetically modified honey, otherwise known as White People Land. And for the purposes of this podcast, we'll refer to that as the WPL. And if you failed Republican geography, White People Land extends from the American city of San Diego all the way northward to the Arctic Circle. Apparently, according to the billionaire brat boy, the little inscription at the base of the Statue of Liberty was not intended for the tired and poor and huddled masses who are coming to the WPL by land. Apparently, it only applies to the tired and poor and huddled masses who are coming from the sea, and preferably if they are hot chicks and come from Eastern Europe, you know, the area where he imports all his wives from. So, the billionaire brat boy, mindful of the approaching menace and his falling poll numbers and the impending electoral moment, he put in a call to the U.S. Army, because he knows that if he doesn't send the U.S. Army, the brown horde from Housekeeperland will cross into White People Land and take our jobs, rape our women, steal our health care, pilfer Social Security, and overrun our public schools. And some of those children, if given the chance, will get into those public schools and get good grades. And even fewer will get into Harvard and Yale and maybe Berkeley and Stanford. And then they'll take the place of deserving rich white folks like that Supreme Court dude known to his drinking buddies as the Cav. Oh, well, that's my rant. Funny how history repeats itself. Last time an American president had to call out the Army to protect us from those meanie brown people was when Woodrow Wilson called up General Blackjack Pershing to chase the wily revolutionary Pancho Villa. Apparently, Pancho and his motley crew stole some chickens from a ranch on the north side of the Rio Grande, so Blackjack and his army chased Pancho back across the border into the Mexican heartland. And that was way back more than 100 years ago. That was way back in 1916. And after Blackjack Pershing spanked Pancho, he headed over to Europe. And then, what did he do? He punched the Kaiser right in the nose, which helped win World War I. And at that time, interestingly enough, they didn't know they were fighting World War I because they had yet to fight World War II. It was only after they fought World War II that the folks who write history books realized that first go-around that had killed millions of people, that must have been World War I. Okay, whatever. I'm rambling. I just thank God for General Blackjack Pershing. Otherwise, Pancho and his ragtag, huddled mass of tired and poor would surely have taken over, and today we'd all be living in Housekeeperland. Okay. I have just completed the bulk of this little podcast. Thank you so much for listening in, for hanging with me, my regulars, my newcomers, whomever and wherever you are across the mad globe of the podcast universe. I want to extend my gratitude to you because my need to express definitely outweighs anybody's desire to hear me. But if you do want to hear me, here's a suggestion. Contact your local comedy club. Ask for the Rebel Without Applause. That's me, Bill Kalmanson. If you're in LA, that would be the Improv. That would be the Comedy Store, the Laugh Factory, any of those venues. That's the best way for me to get on stage, is if people actually ask instead of me calling and bugging them. So once again, thanks for listening. I'll be back soon. Until next time, adios, goodbye, and adieu.